Welcome to Learning cEDH, the podcast dedicated to teaching you everything you need to know about competitive Commander. I'm your host, Matthew, and I am joined once again by my co-host, Eric. And today we're talking about just sort of the hot topics in cEDH right now. So we're going to be talking about the decks that we're going to be playing at CCS. If you're not aware, there's a big old event held by Eminence in Stone Mountain, Georgia at CCS. This is the Topdeck Gaming Expo. There's a ton of other events going on. The main sort of attraction is the cEDH 8K that Eric and I are going to be playing in. But there's Lorcana and Pokemon and all kinds of other, I think, side Magic events and all kinds of stuff going on. Yeah, One Piece might be there. Maybe something. I don't know. I don't know. They keep trying to get everybody on Yu-Gi-Oh at Imminent, so surely there's some kind of Edison format thing going on. You can probably play Yu. You'll find somebody to play Yu-Gi-Oh with at the event, I'm sure.
Just Edison format, which if we're being honest, I would rather play the 2008 format, which was like the Dark Arm Dragon, Gladiator Beast, Lightsworn format, that was before synchros came out and they ruined the game. But that's a whole nother subject. Though I do like Teledad synchro, and then the Edison format's got black wings and stuff in it. So if you know anything about Yu-Gi-Oh, it's actually kind of sweet that they're supporting officially older formats like that.
And yeah, we're going to kind of be going in talking about deck building and like new cards. And one thing Eric and I were just talking about before rolling was that there have been so many cEDH playables printed recently that I think there's a lot of merit to really doing a lot of reevaluation on how your deck is constructed and how you're looking to like challenge the meta, because right now we see a lot of different decks pop up, but there's a lot of blue farm and there's a lot of we got yet another big draw engine that is getting played in every single deck, and cards like Orcish Bowmasters. And so I think there is a new, pretty established meta to try to break, and people, whether it's us or somebody else, are going to be able to take advantage of that in some regard. Looking to run a great cEDH event? Having hosted over 100 successful tournaments, Eminence Gaming has your back with Command Tower. With its intuitive tournament manager dashboard, you can handle everything from deck list submission to player management in just a few clicks. Then, all players need to do is scan a generated QR code to have access to your full tournament bracket. Put your players first with seamless pairing software and real-time access to standings. Take the guesswork out of tournaments. Give Command Tower a try for your next event.
Have you decided on what deck you want to play for the event coming up?
I really want to play Rograkh. So I guess for context, last event I played in was Cookout. There I very last minute switched to Blue Farm because I was just so high on white cards. Really, it was most of what it was. We're in the middle of Mardu Summer, and like I was playing a Mardu list or a Blue Farm list that was on Tithe and Orm's Chant and the 2-drop, not quite a Grand Abolisher. What's his name?
Tithe Taker, I think.
Yeah, Tithe Taker. Yeah. So I was playing a list like that, which is very inspired by a list that had just done pretty well at an event. And I found that, and maybe it was just the worse I did, the more this kind of kept being a thing, because I kept being at tables where I was the only one trying to be responsible in terms of oh, someone's currently winning, or there's a deck here that looks to proactively win. I should keep a responsible hand with 1 to 2 pieces of interaction. And doing that and just being the only person doing it and losing over and over was terrible. I hated that experience. It was very frustrating. I did not do very well, even though I had the win game 1 and just kind of messed up and was just kind of nervous. And then I played Rograkh in Redemption and did really, really well. I got 2 wins and a draw. The 2 wins were unstoppable. Didn't feel like anybody had a chance. Even the games that went longer, it was still just I just have all the stuff that I need, and I'm the one asking the questions instead of looking for answers, and that just felt really strong there. So I swore I would not play Blue Farm, even though I think it's probably the best deck right now at this event, and it's looking like lots of specialists, like we kind of talked about, have swapped the Blue Farm. We saw Freedom Waffle get off of stupid Dargo Thrasios and play Blue Farm, and just seeing a lot of people going over to that deck that are really trying to do well. And I was playing a lot of Kinnan post Cookout because I think the deck was just doing like everybody else was actually playing a lot of Kinnan, because it seemed like everybody was building Kinnan and everybody who's looking to get into the format is playing Kinnan. And we saw like a big swing against Kinnan. Like our last quarterly update, it was looking really good. And then we saw like Mox Masters, everybody was just like packing stuff to deal with Kinnan. Like nobody wants to lose to the deck anymore. And in that regard, it was Winota like, but I still think the deck has more legs. But honestly, I'm probably not playing Kinnan just because my Kinnan list is being used by my friend who's going to CCS and he wants to play Kinnan. And I think I'm going to play Rockside because it is really cool. It lets me either win fast or lose fast, more than likely. So my rounds should be relatively short. At least my engagement level in them will be lower as the game gets longer. And it's also just a pile of broken cards that just plays proactively. It's a deck I've played a lot, and it's changed a lot. Even since Cookout, like there are cards I'm not sure about. The One Ring is like a iffy slot in the deck if it's needed. Talion is probably too grindy for it, but it is like the newest blue-black hotness that people are running. Just throwing in the 99 of decks like Blue Farm. And so yeah, I'm pretty locked in on Roxai, and I kind of just want to show, like I haven't done a ton of prep compared to Cookout. I just kind of want to show up and play and hopefully do well. I'm going to try very hard still, but I'm not really hyper fixating on like getting certain number of reps in and just grinding every day before the event. I really just want to show up, play a deck I like, and that I think is positioned fairly well, and just see how it goes. And then if I don't do well, I'll just hang out with all the cool people that'll be there.
Yeah, so Rockside to me is like really interesting because if you look at the like metagame as a whole currently right now, and I'd say over like the last 3 months, you know, if you don't know what the last 3 months of cEDH looks like, you can actually go to one of our recent videos where we discuss the quarterly breakdown.
Right up here.
Yeah, somewhere here. Spoiler alert, Blue Farm's good and it's still there. And but Rockside still is it occupies in a very interesting space for turbo decks because it obviously, like, I don't understand, like this is maybe you'll be able to explain it to me. Why do people always say that Rockside loses the one piece of interaction? Doesn't Rockside have the most free interaction out of like any deck?
Probably other than like Niv or Talion, which those decks are still. Niv has one pilot who plays it basically, and then Talion is still being a little developed. But yeah, you run a ton of interaction. I feel like it's more. There are hands where that is true for Rockside.
Yeah,
I think if that was true of the deck, you would not have seen players do very well with it consistently because there's almost always one piece of interaction at the table in the early turns. There's almost like I just assume whenever I play the game that one person has a mental misstep. Like that's just my assumption. Your life just feels easier if you just assume that because you're just going to be disappointed when you get your thing misstepped and you weren't ready for it. So if you look at like how Bryant Cook described how the deck like likes to win, if you watch like one of his older videos where he goes over the deck, he talks about it likes to win turn 2-ish with like a piece of interaction because you almost always have some free thing like a Fierce Guardianship or a Daze if you're on that, or Mental Misstep, whatever. And that's when there likely is only like one-ish piece of interaction at the table. And then if you're not doing that, you're probably sitting behind a draw engine. And that kind of changes a lot of how you evaluate when the deck is like positioned well at a table. So I do think there is some merit to that, but it can also be like, if you're playing with Rockside players who are keeping iffy hands that are all in on like their Imp Seal or something, then that can be the case. But I don't think we would see consistent results of it in the top 10 if one piece of interaction stopped it in this super interactive format.
Yeah, it's just really interesting. I think too, the thing that draws me to playing like a deck like Roxai or any deck that's on like a blue-black Necropotence deck is probably Born Upon a Wind. Like that card's pretty wild. Like
it's so good.
There was this I don't know, movement, I would say, like last year where like everybody was like really anti crop rotation emergent zone
and anti necro.
And anti necro, and people kept like downplaying and said, you know, get these cards out of your deck, they're bad, just play better cards. But it's not necessarily about just playing better cards. There's not that many cards that allow you to do this effect, you know, unless you're like on, you know, like Urza's Battle Thopter and those kind of cards. And I think those decks even have their merit. Like Brea, like the Flash Brea list is really sweet just because it's unique. It has multiple flash strategies built into it. It has, you know, effective like combo in the command zone. It's blue, you know, so it's got all sorts of good stuff going on. And to some degree, I do agree that like just the insert random decks that like have like emergent zone in it, just to be there with like no really way to tutor for it, or it's kind of awkward. But decks have access to green that are on Necropotence. I think that is pretty interesting. And then also the fact that like a deck kind of like Obnixilis. Like you wouldn't think about Obnixilis playing Emergent Zone, but Obnixilis gets a lot of value on your opponent's turns. So the ability to just have a colorless land in a 2-color deck, there's not a big ass there. And it's one of those things that it just kind of like goes into the game plan. And that's really kind of where I'd like to take this conversation is that thought process on deck building. Because, you know, the whole NBC thing was like the flavor of the hotness last year or whatever you want to call it. And that just means no bad cards, which inherently sounds great, right? Like, you know, don't run bad cards, you know, play the best cards. And while I agree, absolutely play the best cards of their particular, you know, slot and, you know, play Vampiric Tutor, play Demonic Tutor, play Heuristic Study if you're playing blue, you know, play Dockside Extortionist, play Underworld Breach. Where do you think the NBC is now in the format compared to where it was last year?
Oh, man. I think one change that is, we talked about this a bunch. One of the biggest changes now in cEDH versus last year is that it's easier to tell when something is actually successful and when it's just hyped up on content. So we can look and see, like, Najeela was the main deck that was kind of like championed for this like no bad cards idea. And you can look and see that Najeela did really well beginning of this year and then sort of in the middle and then has done a little bit worse since the printing of Lord of the Rings with like cards like One Ring and Bowmasters, which maybe those specific cards are the cause of the Najeela thing. We talked about this in the quarterly update. And then maybe also like the idea of no bad cards, Najeela, or deck building, this isn't lining up as well of what people are doing. Maybe it's not that there's 2 specific cards that are stopping this whole, you know, super like established archetype to not work anymore. It's that it doesn't work. I think if it was true in the way that it was presented, the format would be way more turbo oriented or super proactively slanting, and that isn't, I mean, the most consistent aspect of cEDH that we've seen in like the past year or two is that Blue Farm is the best deck, and it's very rarely the fastest deck. Sometimes it is at the table, but like in a top 16 it often isn't, and it's just not what seems to get rewarded. And a lot of the idea of no bad cards is having cards that are like good in a vacuum, which we don't really play in a vacuum, and also a lot of them just aren't. We talked about this before the show. Brain Freeze and LED are terrible. They're horrible cards. They're so niche in their application. Same with like Thassa's Oracle. Tanyapad gets away with it. Consult's pretty rough as well. And you make a lot of concessions with like what we would consider the start of building a cEDH deck, where it just includes all of those if they're in your colors. And those aren't good cards. You know, I had a conversation recently talking about Najeela and how it's odd to look at synergistic cards that are mainly there for synergistic purposes as inherently like the opposite of no bad cards, when they are often better. Like a card that's good with Najeela, like something like Samut, or even something that's, you know, maybe not quite as broken, like Professional Facebreaker, something like that.
Yeah, Grim Hireling.
Yeah. Well, that one's really, really good with Najeela, but is going to be good way more often than a card like Brain Freeze or Lion's Eye Diamond in your hand, or like at most, if we're evaluating in a vacuum as a randomly generated average game state. There are a lot of cards that are synergistic. They're just going to be better than the best cards in the format, which are usually the cards that are just so broken they warp the game around it, like the Rhystic Mystics or whatever. And then cards that are considered part of like the upper echelon of win conditions. And now it just seems like slamming everything that has draw a card on it is actually the best way to just win a cEDH tournament. Like we talked about with the One Ring and Talion are showing up in way more 99s. And I also think the idea of no bad cards was also, you can make a 99 or 98, whatever, with no bad cards probably a lot of different ways, because there are, like we're saying, like there are way more good cards now. Like, I think there are more cEDH playables now than there were last year. I think there's there's more directions you can go when you have like, and they're changing the way you evaluate. So you kept talking about Born Upon a Win, and that card has changed the way a deck might evaluate running something like Necropotence, where a lot of blue farm lists don't run Necropotence, but they run Final Fortune, and we're even seeing some run Born Upon a Win without really necessarily a broken card to take advantage of it. Like it is better. Like it makes all your stuff better, but it doesn't have a card that's like the A+B that Necro Born Upon a Win kind of is. But then that can change your evaluation of, okay, well, do I run Necropotence? That's still a good card. And is something like Sarah Ascendant, does that qualify as a no bad card? Or like, I think there's so many ways you can go with it. And I think a lot of it just boils down to like this philosophy wasn't exactly ironed out, perfectly set in stone what it represents. And I think some degree of synergistic deck building is just like going to be rewarding in a format where you start with a special card in your hand every game with your commander. I mean, we saw like Krark Silas just almost top forward, and Malcolm Kedis just won the Mox Masters Invitational. And those are very much like those decks are the opposite of no bad cards in a lot of regards. With a lot of the stuff they run, especially Malcolm Kedis, that is almost exclusively bad cards. And then you got Breach and Dockside, and then that's it.
Yeah, Maskwood Nexus, Piracy Charm, all those type of things. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I've always thought the whole NBC thing I like the concept of it, because what I thought NBC was a legitimate way to cut the fat from a lot of these decks that were just running cards because they were like in the deck or whatever, or people just felt like they had to be in there because, they've always been there. And so, because I felt like cEDH was pretty stagnant for about kind of like post ban of Flash, it felt super stagnant. Like I don't really like, it just felt like nothing changed. Like Timna Thrasios was still like the best thing to be doing. And then like, there was obviously other Thrasios variants like Dawn Waker. And then we just kind of saw the same stuff for a little bit. And obviously there was other decks being played, this is more so just speaking like hyperbole, and then it wasn't really until like a big shift to the tournament scene really changed the way like a lot of decks started coming out. And then also understanding like, what does your deck actually do? And do these cards aid that deck into that strategy? And I think that's really where NBC its strong suit is the ability to basically identify the strengths of your decks, the weaknesses of your deck, and lean into your strengths versus like always trying to cover your bases. And I think that's something like Magic players, especially if they're used to a 60 card format, they get a 15 card sideboard, right? Their sideboard is to always cover their plan, right? Like is to help them out one way or another. cEDH or just Commander in general, we don't get a sideboard, right? Like we get 100 slots. So we've got to kind of maybe run some cards in our deck that we don't inherently want to run. Like I never want to run Assassin's Trophy. I think that card feels terrible, like in like any kind of like storm based decks, but it's 2 mana destroy anything, and you just don't get that rate too often. So like inherently, like I would not run Assassin's Trophy in like an NPC plan, like, but I think because it's a catch-all and it fixes a lot of my problems without giving up a lot of slots, I think that's really important in like deck construction and everything, and like being intentional with your card slots. I think that is really, really important. And I think we're going to head into a way where everyone's just jamming their One Rings, their Italians. Obviously, Rhystic and Mystic are always there. They're on kind of the slower end, but like they're, I don't know if you've seen that new 4/4 artifact creature that like
the like changeling-ish. You can choose a creature type.
Yeah, it's like a changeling panharmonicon or whatever.
Yeah, you double triggered abilities of a creature type
that you control. So like people are already like talking about like, just slotting that into their decks and stuff. And, like in Magda, that seems great, right? Because like Dwarf, it's really good. Obviously Goblin's really good on Dockside. It's probably decent in like a Krark Sakashima deck because you just name Goblin, and get all the value.
Get a lot of coverage. It's also like obviously Malcolm decks. It's very strong there because you again like there's just a lot of good crossover. You just name Pirate and you get Dockside Extortionist and you get all the Malcolm cards.
Oh, that's a sweet card in Winota, right? Like
you name human and it'll trigger all those.
Yeah.
And it seems like another good like Timna. It seems like another like if you're doing human tribal or 4-color human swarm. Like one, just doubling Timna is pretty good if you can draw up to 6 cards off of Timna. And then you also get to name things like Esper Sentinel gets covered under that. And like you can also get flexibility to be able to say like, oh, well, I'm leaning on Crom this game. I'm going to name Zombie, or I think he's Zombie Horror. Or you can, again, just say, I'm just going to name Pirate and double up my Dockside I'm playing next turn if this makes it around. And then again, and also like it's another card that can push you in different directions because we were talking about like before the show, the new Malcolm. Like if you're playing that, then naming Pirate gets a little bit extra like strength to it and like can carry you along the way. Or you can play, it also doubles your Fairy Mastermind. So like there's a lot of different ways that like that card is like inherently looks like a synergy card, but it is instead of like something like Maskwood Nexus, which is like kind of just forced to be a synergy card for the most part. That can just be like, well, my game plan is creatures because I'm playing cEDH and most of the broken cards in this format are creatures. Like, and it lets you, it's not locked in on any one thing, and it lets you like change your game plan with it, which I think is like a good sign for a card, even if it is at like 4 mana, which can be a little tough.
Yeah, so that card's pretty interesting. I again, it's one of those things of like, will it see a ton of play? I don't know. Will it be played in like a lot of synergistic based decks like Magda? Sure. I think that's where like a card like that fits in. And like you were talking about, there have been so many cEDH staples that have been printed or just cEDH powered level cards that I don't feel like I have the adequacy to evaluate them yet. Like, you know, like we know the One Ring's really good in the decks that can put, but like, should it be in every deck? You know, Is it one of those cards that like just jam the One Ring? It's that good if you're on fast mana and those type of things. And it feels good when you see it early. Obviously, it's really insane. But like if you know, later in the game when you're like storming or something, you know, it's kind of a dead card. You know, it's not like how you could proactively play like a Ristic Study into a storm turn. And then if everyone's trying to fight through your storm, you're just drawing cards along the way there.
That's where I think like Talion actually is better than the one, like, because that it's also broken early, but then like the One Ring may be more broken like turn 1 than a lot of the draw engines. But then it definitely falls off, like you're saying. Like if you're gonna play it on like turn 5 and then pass, it's not, you're gonna draw like 3 cards. You're 4 mana, draw 3 before you probably get to the turn where you need to win. That's really not that great. But then yeah, if you get to sit down Ristic Mystic, there's been a lot of people talking about how if you have a Mystic, you don't play it on turn 1, you play it on turn 2. When people are just like, I guess, feel more pressured and there's just more spells being cast in general. So yeah, those ones are especially broken just kind of whenever. But
yeah, so it's just, again, it's pretty interesting to see, like, you know, and I'm always like reevaluating decks and stuff like that. There are people way smarter than me, and like I'm not one of those people that, you know, feels like that they're some kind of like brainchild of like deck building or anything. I just, you know, people who actually like literally just do cEDH stuff all day, you know, that's like that's what they do. They have the time, the bandwidth. Unfortunately, that's not me. So I would rather trust like, you know, those people working on those decks, like with like Rograkh and those type of things there, and go from that. Blue Farm's a little bit different just because like it's clearly got a direction, but it's very soup-like, because a ton of the variations of like Blue Farm that you see are always like the creature slots are different or whatever. Like
there's like a million 2-drops you could viably run in that deck. Like, and even more in Ixalan, like that new Manglehorn.
Oh yeah. Yeah, again, new type of card, the Manglehorn, like mixed with like a Mox Monkey, you know, kind of like thing. But but like if you looked at the Haruryua tournament that just happened, which was like 134 players in Japan, Blue Farm won it. Surprise. Their list ran Deep Gnome Terramancer. I didn't know I owned that card. I have the deck that it came with, which, by the way, that actually deck was pretty cracked for a precon. Basically, whenever your opponent cracks a fetch lane, you just go get another planes and put it into play. That's like better than Tithe.
Yeah.
To me. And I was like, wow, it's a 2-drop with flash, of course, because, you know, cards have to have flash to be
playable. We get a new one of those printed at least once a week.
Yeah, just every color but green's getting Flash Bros and red. So if you really think about, while drawing a card is inherently very good, that's why you have Archivist of Ogma as well. Again, these kind of cards are they're just in every set now. Like this whole, if your opponent breathes, you get rewarded. And I wish it was more about like what you're doing than what your opponent's doing, because you know, it's good to be the ability to like pivot and flow within a game, but in reality, like, and it could just be more of my play style, but I very much prefer to be proactive, and you can have reactive spells in your deck, and there's nothing wrong with that, because, you know, Force of Will is a good magic card, despite people wanting to cut it like a year, like half a year ago or something like that. You know, these kind of cards, they're adding up. Like every deck has them in some variety. Like there's, whether it's just Orcish Bowmaster, but, you know, whether it's Bowmaster, Opposition Agent, to a smaller extent, Dauthi Voidwalker, you have Deep Gnome Terramancer, you have Archivist of Ogma, you have Talion, Fairy Mastermind. You know, it's like, wow. Like it's a lot of the same stuff. And I think those kind of cards are just so powerful. And we're just kind of moving into this direction where every deck is like these big, powerful draw engines or these even medium advantage engines that just cascade over time. And I think there's some cool design space into having like cards that are like dockside, I guess, but like maybe the treasure's coming to play tap because then they, they get punished by another dockside, those type of things. But I don't know. I don't want to say I'm nervous because we've talked about this in an older episode, but we talked about how these kind of cards were just when Fairy Mastermind got printed, that they're just becoming so ubiquitous and like in the strategies and stuff. And because like you got to think about it, like they just printed like Fairy Mastermind and Talion and like not too far apart. Like it's like, whoa, chill out on the blue draw engines. Like also too, Talion attacks, it's a 3/4, right?
3/4
like it's
flyer.
A 3/4. Yeah.
That also when it triggers deals damage.
And that's another reason why I really like it in the blue farm shells, because it's a good Tymna attacker. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know where the format's going to go. I don't know if there's even an opportunity to like take advantage, because being like a turbo player, I think you have to, if you're a turbo player, you better be like Zane level, because Z-Rob's pretty cracked and he's just a good player, good mindset the way he plays. And he knows how to pilot like Rogsai and those type of things, but and not having the crutch of having like a draw engine in the command zone, right? Like just being able to play on the power level of what like Rograkh gives you and what the deck can do. So I think you have to be like a pretty high skilled pilot to like considerably like play turbo in like this current format. And I don't know. And
that might be what the Najeela players are experiencing, really. Like that deck, like so many of those builds are definitely, those are turbo decks that they're 5-color Rogsai, but, we talked about this on episode. You don't get the Rog turn 1 guaranteed. They seem to almost always have it. They always get that Najeela, it seems like. But sometimes you don't. When I'm playing the decks, I don't. But it was really interesting. I had never put together until you were talking there for a second, was that you mentioned cards that reward you for what you're doing and then cards that reward you for what your opponent's doing. And you could almost look at that as the split or like the line of no bad cards that reward you for what your opponents are doing, synergistic cards, which is inherently that opposite thing of cards that reward you for what you're doing, and then you have all the other stuff in between, all the whole spectrum. It's not really a thought that I had before. Yeah, there's definitely a lot. Like there are so many of those cards. Again, like we talked about, you have so many cEDH playables. You could build a blue farm deck if you wanted. Almost every one of your creatures could have flash and definitely be cEDH viable. Whether it be the best list you could, get together or not, you just have that many options. You could just say, you know what, Fairy Mastermind, I'm sick of it dying to Bowmasters, throwing in Archivist of Ogma or Deep Known Terramancer instead. Is that the thing that makes, like, there's just so much of that effect, it makes the meta sort of homogenous in that regard, because there's just too much of that? Like, is everybody just forced to do that or win turn 1 or 2?
So what's interesting to me is that there's that term parasitic, where people complain about like parasitic decks, basically non-blue decks that don't have interaction. By playing all these type of creatures like Talion and Shieldred and Bowmaster and whatever whatever you want to throw under the sun there, those cards literally prey on your opponent's doing things. That is inherently parasitic in nature. So it's, even though like they're playing blue, they're still playing parasitic cards. And I'm not disagreeing with it because they're good. Like, why wouldn't you play them? But at the same time, I think that's always kind of funny where people like complain about like proactive decks that are like probably maybe sans blue that are more parasitic. Something like the Get Rog Monster, for example, those type of decks. They're just like, oh, those decks trash because they're parasitic and, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, like you're playing nothing but parasitic cards. Like Opposition Agent effectively doesn't do anything unless your opponent's trying to search, right? So yeah, it's a parasitic card. It's those type of things that are, it's just it's like the new form of stacks. Instead of like staxing out your opponent, you're just getting rewarded for whenever they're doing anything. And I don't know. I guess it probably really all started with like Dockside, right? Like that was like the first card that kind of did the thing like that. And then
especially that like has warped the game to that extent. Like you didn't really have decks built around Rhystic and Mystic, which those are probably like the original, like a hand that does just a turn 1 Rhystic and nothing else is probably keepable, but it is inherently like hoping that your opponents will do things that let you win the game eventually, and it is fully enabled by your opponent. Nothing that you do is going to make that better. It's just you're relying on your opponent to do things. And then but now like a card like Dockside super highlights that, because it's like, oh, well, my deck is built to enable Dockside. And, you know, a lot of the main thing, like they are inherently like meta break. Like parasitic is an accurate term that has a negative connotation, but it's not inherently a negative term. It's just a descriptor. It's what it really is, just like taking advantage of something like you mentioned, like Shieldred and Smothering Tithe. Your opponents will draw cards. Like some of these effects, those are going to happen. That's just going to happen. That's just if your opponents aren't drawing cards, then I'm assuming you don't have any opponents left, or they all have a necro in play. And I think a lot of it is, I don't like to complain about commander product, but the game is so focused on commander that there's such an incentive for them to make cards that trigger off of your opponents, because they can, you know, your opponents are going to take 3 times as many game actions as you. If you want to print a commander staple immediately, if it's not something like a Jewel Lotus, then it should be something like a Dockside Extortionist or an Archivist of Ogma, Esper Sentinel, whatever. And we were talking about before the show that you don't know how to beat it. It's like the main thing we're kind of beating around the bush here is of just like, what do you do to beat these decks when you're approaching deck building? Like for me, someone who's planning to play Roxai in a big event, or like you, someone who's going to play Corvold, how do you consistently beat so much value in a world where like you can expect a pod of, you know, yourself and then 3 players who are playing these sort of grindy, they're not really hate bears, grind bears, I guess. These 2 drops that, you know, every time you do something, they get you value. You know, how do you consistently actually perform in that environment?
You don't. So full disclosure, obviously, the only reason I'm playing Corvold in the CCS is just because like I committed to playing to the deck. I'll be honest with you, last 2 weeks I haven't even enjoyed playing it. Like, and I have a pretty decent like win record in playtesting. Like every new tool that comes out lately, it's not really fit the deck. Like it's been kind of awkward. Like I played the One Ring at the cookout and it was really good. But like anytime that like the deck relies on like ad nauseum, it doesn't feel good. Bowmaster has been a card that's like, you would think that it would really have punished me, but it hasn't as much, just because you typically just still win. Like if your Corvold's out doing its thing and, you know, you're getting the chain, because eventually you'll just find a piece of removal, kill it, and then go about your business. Or just play your own Bowmaster. And that's like a card that's like slipped its way into the deck. And some people they don't like it because it's not part of the game plan of what that deck does. But what that card is that card gives you something to do on turn 2, like smoothing out your draws. It is able to remove like, you know, X1, so like Athalia, Esper Sentinel, those type of cards. But it gives you that body, and it's like, you know, at that point, it also like allows your wheels to be pretty effective. And it's not like a card that you think about in that strategy, but it's still good enough, and it's pretty powerful overall to just like play. But like great example is like just Beseech the Mirror. I don't know how to evaluate that card. I really don't. Like it seems cracked. It's really sweet in Legacy. It's really good, and then it's really cool in Vintage. But I don't know where that card really lies in the power level. Like, do you really need it? Like at 4 mana, like it definitely can trade up in mana, which is really nice. Like being able to go get like certain like powerful, like if you're getting like a Ristic Study off of it, that's great. But like I don't have access to that. Like I don't have like that type of card. It gets a 1 ring, but if I'm probably ritualing and ramping into that and then also sacrificing my artifact, getting the 1 ring feels like really like that's not where I want to be in a Jund Storm deck, you know. And so especially
if then your 1 ring gets countered, because they still get, you know, they still can respond to the spell the Beseech gets. Then you just get so blown out of just like, I had to expend a ritual to get this, more than like, at least you're expending a ritual probably to get it if you're getting the 1 ring, because it needs to be really early for that to be like a play that makes a lot of sense. Often sacrificing that artifact, like you mentioned, going down the card or 2 cards that were in your hand, and then they counter the 1 ring, and then it's just like, well, thanks.
And do I think the card is very good? Yeah, it's great in like Rogside, but look at all of Rogsai's targets. You know, it can get, you know, Wheels, Ristic, Yawgmoth's Will, you know.
Mnemonic Betrayal. It just has another crazy one.
Mnemonic Betrayal. Yeah, I keep forgetting that card exists, that card is just so bust. It's just a free win condition on its own based on the way the games play out. But so it's been kind of like this push and pull of where I want the deck to be if I legitimately think that I have a shot top 16 with it, because like, you know, I'm like a turn order out that I didn't top 16 like the cookout with that deck, because the deck was drawn like it was playing really well. And Dockside in tournament play is so much different than Dockside in testing. Dockside in testing always sucks for some reason. When I'm in tournament play, people are just like slinging artifacts and enchantments, and like Dockside's like minimum making 4 on turn 2. Turn 3, it's like 5 to 6, those type of things, which is pretty wild. Because, you know, if you ever watch any of the coverages, like, did you see like Zane's dockside? I think it made 8 treasures. Like, oh, it was so gross. I'm going to give credit where credit's due. Into the North was talking about this actually very similar subject, like on their recent episode of the podcast, is like how to like take advantage of like the meta game where it's at. If it is this like mid-rangey grind fest. And then really the thought is always like, so it's Grand Abolisher and Ranger Captain. Well, Corporal doesn't have access to those cards, right? Like, it's probably just like, I think you have to like definitely play Dosen. And anytime I see a Corporal deck not run Dosen, it makes no sense to me because it plays into how the deck wants to go. Because if your whole goal is to storm off and try to win, and you've got like a reanimation piece, typically you want to like Eldritch Evolution into the Dosen or cast it off like a Orcish Lumberjack or something. And then at that point, if you have a Corporal out and a Dosen and a reanimation card, or a dockside or anything like that, it really doesn't take a lot to like kind of keep going. And if you peter out, that sucks. You can still just attack with your Corvolt and get rid of the Dosen. So like you don't have to worry about like the table like losing to your own card. Same with Defense Grid. Mm-hmm. I think it's like Dosen Defense Grid's probably the most consistent way. And again, I think it's just being the best dockside deck, because if dockside is still the linchpin of what makes all these like red based X decks go, and we see other red like sans red decks do very well, like Atraxa, but Atraxa would play dockside if they could, right?
Yeah.
You know, is to be consistent on the dockside. You can't just like rely on your traditional tutor suite. Like if you're on, like, say, Black Red X, realistically, how many like cards do you have that tutor for dockside? You know, you've got Demonic Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, Imperial Seal, Gamble, you know, so that now you're dipping into cards like Grim Tutor, Beseech the Mirror, those type of cards to like kind of like access maybe even Imperial Recruiter or something of that nature. That's where green comes in. I think to play green, you have to play the strengths of green. And one of those is their creature tutors. They have some of the best creature tutors, whether it's mono green or green and blue with like Neoform. And to some level, even Birthing Pod, which probably actually should see a little bit more play, like, because if you Birthing Pod a Dork into a dockside, like, isn't that worth it?
Yeah,
I mean, that seems pretty good to me. But
yeah, we've really only seen like the Dargo decks kind of do that, where more decks could, I feel like, take advantage of that, but then they get the really broken thing of like Birthing Pod away Dargo into Tidespout Tyrant. But then also, yeah, a lot of the times they're just getting rid of Ragavan or a Dork to get dockside, which is sometimes just as broken.
Yeah. So, but to, you know, sum up and answer your question, like as much as possible, like how do we like try to combat like this format is just basically applying a lot of pressure and just trying the deck to, you know, be as powerful and as explosive as possible, and still play as high as amount of card quality as possible without really sacrificing. Because if you're going to play ad nauseum and be a dedicated ad nauseum deck, like this is my thing. Either I do a dockside, some kind of dockside shenanigan, or I do ad nauseum or necropotence. So I kind of like want to put those together. Then you need to be a really good version of that. And then just hopefully that your mulligans put you in a position to compete. Do I think that they could win a tournament? I don't know. I mean, Unrivaled was one win away from winning Mox Masters, one of the Mox Masters events with Corvold. We see other Sans like blue decks, top 16 or top 4 all the time. You know, it's not like a lot of it has to do with pod composition. Now, if you got like 3 derpy mid-range decks that aren't actively doing anything, it's one thing. But then again, if you look at all these mid-range decks, they're all kind of greedy with artifacts, right? Like they're all looking for their fast mana.
It came up when we interviewed Zane, was he was talking about like so many people are just looking for the draw engines and mana that they are bottoming, you know, like the Swan Songs or whatever when they're mulliganing, and getting really greedy and getting under them is kind of the best thing. In that regard, I actually think, while you were talking about that, it came to my mind that like a dockside ban would be like the worst thing to ever happen, because this game would get so grindy. It would be sickening how grindy this game would be if there weren't such a powerful proactive card.
Braden talked about this a long time ago in the cEDH cast. Without printing cards like to some degree like Dockside and Jessica's Will and those type of effects is that the format would just get really slow. And it's not like Jessica's Will is like this world beater of a card, but in the decks that it's played in, it's a pretty powerful card, especially in like any kind of Rograkh deck, right? So it's just a powerful effect there. So, and it, you know, can accelerate you and stuff. So people keep saying like Wizards doesn't print cards for cEDH. That may be true, but they print cards for Commander. And Commander is closer to cEDH a lot more than what people want to really like give credit for. Because if you look at like, you have to really try to build a low powered deck, you know, and you can play all these like, you know, fun synergistic decks for make bands and, you know, with your play group and whatever like that. But if you objectively just built a commander deck based on like a powerful commander, like that deck's going to play towards a cEDH way of playing. It may not be optimal, but it's still playing Soul Ring. It's still playing Arcane Signet. It's still trying to accelerate early into your commander or some powerful draw engine and go from there. And I think it would be interesting to see like more like storm-based mechanics or just more like powerful mechanics and print them into sets where they're not going to like affect modern, I guess. You know, I mean, I could care less. Modern's garbage now anyways. Like it's just Rakdos Scam and the 4-color Beans deck. And then, you know, like there's a few other decks that do well, like Team of Rhinos. And yeah, I don't know. I again, there's no cards that like, to me, ubiquitously like punish like the Rhystic and the Mystics. Like, you could say Bowmaster does. Bowmaster just punishes creatures. Really, it's not like Bowmaster comes into play, deals the damage, and blows something up. You know, like that's the type you would have to like print a card that is so inherently pushed to deal with what's going on now. And I just think we just have to accept that's the world we're in. We're in this like really, really grindy world, and until they print cards that help you get under or help speed up the game, then these type of cards, it reminds me of Standard. It reminds me of Standard over the last like 5-6 years. It's just every value engine grind piece that's available in whatever like 3 and 4 color soup. Think about this. Before Jewel Lotus was printed, would you ever have played Atraxa? Probably not, right? Like,
oh yeah, that's pretty rough.
Yeah, same with Tivit. But like you get those type of things that are just hyper pushing these big like value engines out early. And then not to mention you have now like even like Talion on turn 1 out of the command zone is like very reasonable off of a Jewel Lotus, right? Like that's just abysmal to play against.
It's pretty rough. As someone who has played in games, I had told you this and tweeted, like I played in a game where we had 3 Talions on turn 1. That, you want to talk about warping, that is a ridiculous way to play Magic. Like I could not win with everything in the world I could need in my hand because casting Thassa's Oracle on its own dealt me 6 damage and drew my opponent's 3 cards. Like it's so brutal. And I think a lot of I had touched on this in one of my last videos, the popularity of clones really going up also has kind of shown just how like warping a lot of the creatures that sit around has been, which of course, like one of the best targets for a clone is Dockside, but often again, like targeting one of your draw engines, like getting somebody else's Talion, getting somebody else's, you know, another explosive card, be Atraxa, sometimes even getting someone else's Kinnan, just like Esper Sentinel even. But there's just so many things that sit on the board and just draw you cards. Like Fimage on, again, like an Archivist of Ogma is not an unreasonable play to make. And yeah, I don't really know. Is maybe to tie this all together, is even more no batter cards? Is that what's required? Do we just need to get even better with our cards?
Yeah, that's the question. I'll leave that to the deck experts and let them figure all that out and them like, you know, come up with like the next hot new thing or whatever. Cause right now, like the running joke is Control Winter.
That's true.
And people are talking about how Control Winter's like a thing and whatnot. And, you know, control is such a loose term in Commander, especially cEDH, because like there's very, very actually few control decks that actively tried to like 1v3 a pod, you know? I don't know if I would like state that Control Winter. First off, Winota is not a control deck. It's a turbo deck. It's not a stacks deck, it's a turbo deck. It has stacks cards, but it is a turbo deck.
Especially, we're talking about like 3 cards that work on the stack. And Winota, like that is so far from control. Like if at the very least, we should be able to agree that a counter spell is required in a deck list for it to even be remotely considered control.
Yeah. Cannon's not a control deck. It's a big mana deck. It's a big mana deck that cheats things into play. Like it's like half sneak and show, like half big mana Tron style stuff. Like that's not a control deck. Like, can it control the game? Sure, but so can any deck that has the ability to play blue. You know,
that
like
reminds me of.
I'm thinking of like go ahead.
I was gonna say the last week when I went to the store, I was playing Rograkh and I played a turn 2 consultation, trying to just get into gas, and I exiled one half of everything that can win the game, including like Praetor's Grasp, Mnemonic Betrayal. Any card that can get access to a card that wins the game or a card that on its own wins the game was gone, despite only going like 15, 20 cards deep. And I was just like, we were playing tournament, with timer. And I was just like, okay, well, I'm the control deck now. And next turn I sat down on Mystic Lemora and I was like, you guys know all my win cards are gone. And I just played control for like 45 minutes and it worked. I played to a draw because I was drawing a ton of cards because everybody's trying to push through. And I have more free or cheap interaction than like any other deck at the table because Rograkh just runs a ton of it. And yeah, I was just like, you know what, played to a draw. And it happened, and it wasn't even hard. It was it was quite something.
Yeah, so I would say like what Talion's a control deck. I also think the decks that are running like I think Tivit kind of falls in that category, even though Tivit's very much a mid-range deck as well. And they're also trying like I've heard like two different like views is like no, you're not trying to turbo out Tivit, and then there's Zane going yeah you want to slam Tivit ASAP and crush. And then try to like push through a win because that's the advantage of playing your 6 mana commander if you can play it early. It's pretty it's tough because like it probably sounds like I'm very anti-blue. It's just that like blue has been the most dominant color in Magic for so like literally from the beginning. And there's periods when blue's not good, right? Like especially like before Commander was ever a thing. But now here's what I'm seeing. They print a card like, let's say like Italian. That's like this really good solid body, good stats, draws cards and deals damage. If it didn't do like the Shieldred thing plus draw card, that's kind of, or if like it made you lose life to draw cards, still probably decent, but not as broken. And you would think you're just like, oh, well, it's just a creature, kill it. It's cEDH. That doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Especially when more than likely your way to kill it draws them a card. And you're also talking about them probably sitting behind like potentially another draw engine. And then like you also get into situations where like if your plan is to kill it, and then like one thing Talion really like completely shuts down its breach loops. If you put Talion on 2, it gets really hard to win because you're drawing them like probably 3 cards, taking 6 damage by the time you kind of like have your thing set up to be able to go. And then maybe you're okay at that point, but you're just drawing them so much crap. And then you can even get into spots where people want to keep the Talion around, like other players, because they're just like, well, this is stopping you from winning. I'm not going to feed to the Talion, blah, blah, blah. You're not going to feed into it if I keep it. I don't know. It gets really warping in that regard, and just don't. Plus, it's like, it is especially annoying when they put it, like it's in the cEDH colors. Like, it's just, it's blue-black. Like, you could have made it, if Talion was blue-white, it's slightly different story. It's still probably just as annoying, slightly different story. Or again, like you would maybe prefer like if it's a blue-green card, that's way different at that point. You're putting in like a way different color, or again, just green, make it a green-red card, whatever. But yeah, blue is always there. We talked about this with Born Upon a Win. Should have been like a green card, probably.
Yeah, because green was one of the flash mechanics that puts like multiple things into play, not just blue instants or stuff like that. But I guess that comes through if like I don't know the lore of Lord of the Rings and the whole Born Upon a Win thing, so I don't know what that entails.
They're in a boat, so it has to be blue. That was my thought.
Yeah, so I was like, well, it's, and that's the thing too. Like green's got good cards. It's just that it hasn't got a card to keep up, I think, with the current level of cEDH. And it's still playable. Like we still see green in all sorts of decks. But like Eternal Witness just isn't cutting it anymore. You know what I mean? Like it's really not. It's not the powerhouse of just the staple it used to be. Like I don't even play it. And occasionally I miss it, but I'm just like, yeah, I have Breach and Noxious Revival. Like whatever. And then decks that, have the other one, they have Sylvain's Reclamation. So, those type of things. And I know some decks still play it because it like isn't, it's like a combo piece in their deck or whatever. But like if you're like looping Eternal Witness as a main combo, like, I don't know. I think your deck, you got some deck card choices you could probably like sure up a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. I know green just needs something. I don't know what it is.
I know one thing you mentioned, I think before we started recording, was that you were thinking about Rograkh though, which is a pretty green focused deck there.
Yeah, so the thing about Rograkh is really interesting. You lose access to black out of like, let's say you wanted to play more like a Thrasios Vial Smasher list, which the deck's kind of had a resurgence lately. It was played, I think, at Silicon Dynasty 2. No, not Silicon Dynasty 2.
I know it won Bonfire.
Yeah, it won Bonfire, but it was played by Cash Cards Unlimited, right?
CCU.
Okay, yeah. Sorry. That deck, like the turbo style of deck, was played there. And then that deck has been kind of like evolved on. And then Jorman played a Bonfire. And then now it was also topped 16 and playing with Power. They're invitational. Yeah. Okay.
With Yidris, right next to each other. Same colors.
Yeah. Yeah. Really cool stuff, right? That's really interesting. And the theory behind it's really good. Your combos are like Kennen. You have Kennen combo. You have Thassa's Oracle combo. You have Dockside Team or Sabertooth. So that's pretty good if you really think about it. Like that's a lot of varied. Oh, and obviously any kind of breach combo, right? So then you got all these like variations of like different pathways you can take based on the game state to win. Now it's 4 colors, and then there's like Rograkh, which Sam Black was talking about, and this is like a non-polymorph variant, and like he's played before, and he's got a build and everything out, and it's got some unique card choices like Mox Diamond, like no Mox Diamonds, those type of things. And I'm not even worried about the nitty gritty stuff like that. I'm more so interested in the fact that, again, it has Dockside combos, hard to interact with because they're creature based. You have Kennen combo, again, not the easiest to interact with. And then also it gets to utilize like Mind Goblin, which is the blank goblin or guacamole goblin or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, that's pretty good with like a Cloudstone Curio loop with your Rograkh in, the command zone. And then obviously getting access to Thrasios, and then you can just Thrasios into whatever you need. And then, I don't know, it's a creature, all your creature tutors like really kind of set you up for it, and been able to like, sack some like dork or whatever to like a Neoform or Eldritch Evolution into either like a Dockside or a Mind Goblin. And then it gives you a way to win the game with a Goblin that's not Dockside, that doesn't require your opponents. It just, because what's the minimum you can make on it? 4?
I think if you have the right sheet, yeah, it's 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, 4, 5, 6. So again, with Rograkh in your command zone, you go infinite red. And again, I think that's also something to look at for like any deck that has access to an outlet like that, or like Timna Jessica. I think that's a really cool way to win because you're already on Cloudstone Curio combo. Like anyways, like I've heard a lot of like, I don't know, some people don't like Cloudstone. I think Cloudstone is really sweet. Like it's like one of those cards that it never feels bad seeing it because you're just literally like a Dockside away from winning the game. So
I do think it like similar to like Temur Sabertooth, when you're doing it with Dockside, it can sometimes mean that like this is a combo that isn't reliably going to win me the game until like after turn 4 or something. But then like you're talking about with the Sticker Goblin or whatever, that just works all the time. Like that's just always going to work, which is really nice. And you're not really like, yeah, that card isn't quite as good as Dockside, but you're not really, it's definitely not a dead card when it is just a ritual now on a body. So that part is nice. One thing that triggered me while you were talking about Dockside loops is that I realized that unlike, Mystic and Ristic, which you can eventually pay for, Talion on 1 or 2, you can't Dockside loop at all. They just get to keep hitting you every time, and wow, I hate that card. So dumb.
Yeah, Dockside, like the Dockside bounce loops, anything like Ruthless Tectomancer, again, just wins through everything. It's actually probably like secretly one of those combos that like people just, they don't respect because people, they don't think about it. But like Timna Dargo, they use Ruthless Tectomancer. I always think that's pretty interesting. I think having a, like, even though it's a 3-piece combo, it still falls into the way the deck's played. Like the deck is still this turbo ad nauseum deck, and it's kind of doing its thing. Being able to establish a combo that can win through a Ristic, a Mystic, a Ranger Captain, I think is really interesting. I love it in Corvold. It's obviously pretty cracked with the Corvold. It's pretty good with eating a Dargo up as well. It's one of those cards that probably could use a little bit more loving. And effectively, it's the same thing for like Kenrith. Kenrith gets to abuse Emil. and Dockside, right? Like that they get to do that. They also have like where if Dockside makes enough, they can just Kenrith loop the Dockside with the Skirt Prospector as well.
Yeah, do like image loops. They have like a lot of different things they can do.
I think something like that's pretty interesting. And again, I don't know what I'm gonna play post this tournament. I don't even have my final list of Corvold yet. Like I'm pretty close. I've got an event coming up this weekend. It's a local, but I think it's close to, it's gonna have like 80 players, give or take. It's gonna be really solid. First place is a Black Border Foreign Underground seat.
Yeah, I was really like, I was like, maybe it's not that far. And I looked at the event. I was like, oh, it's 7 hours. That's a little bit of a that's a little bit of a drive for me.
Speaking of that, I got asked like several, like there's some people who were like, are you going to play in LotusCon next year? Because like LotusCon falls on my anniversary, my marriage anniversary. So this year was our 1 year anniversary for being married. So it wasn't advantageous for me to be like, you know, sweetie, I'm going to go try to play Magic, you know. Though she said, joking aside, she said she was willing to like, if we like basically made it like a trip and I was like, we're not going to the St. Louis area for our anniversary. There's not much there unless it's changed in the last few years. It's pretty filthy, so not a huge fan. Sorry, St. Louis, you lost everything when you let the Rams go.
All right, before we end this one, what's the deck, what's taking down Topdeck Expo? What are you scared to play against at Expo? Is it just Blue Farm? Is it just always Blue Farm?
So it's weird because I'm never scared of playing against Blue Farm. I don't know. There's not like a deck that I'm like inherently scared to play against. Oh, I hate playing against like Niv Mizzet. That's probably honestly the deck I hate playing against the most because they always have a turn 2 Spellskite and it's just, I don't know. It's really just one of those cards that frustrate me as a player because I'm like, oh, I can't use one of my clone effects on my Dockside or whatever. But no, joking aside, I don't know. I think decks that just like Rogside that are just a faster turbo deck than me that can really like, because like Rogside is a really interesting like concept. It's like I like playing against it because it feeds my Dockside. But if their internal order, that turn order really matters because I don't really have a way to interact with that deck at all. Like I'm not going to run endurance. Like I don't believe in that. I think it's ridiculous to be like the Force of Vigor endurance guy. Like I always, so I was trying to have this conversation. Someone was talking about running like Force of Vigor in their deck and like their Corvold deck, and I go, so you're gonna, go down 2 cards to destroy a Rhystic Study and a Mystic Lemora to draw them 2 cards. Got it. Like
it'd be like that sometimes.
I just think when you have to play that type of game, you're already losing, and you're better to try to just push for a win before they fill their hand up. Those type of things. I just think that's just more advantageous. Maybe we still need to be playing like 3-time walk effects, those type of things. Getting Najila back to like it's really proactive game plan. Everyone says Samut's good. I don't know. I haven't really it seems good. But it's only like, isn't it only good if Najila's out? Like,
yeah, I hadn't played a lot of Najila, but playing the deck kind of recently because I was testing it like over Rogsai. And it felt always kind of awkward because it's like everybody just wants to kill your Najila all the time anyways. It doesn't matter what you're doing. If they have a way to just bolt or something or swords, they'll just hit the Najila. And then, it can just line up really awkwardly with Smut. Or again, like I think one of the actual weaknesses is that there's just a million blockers in every single game state that you play in. There are just so many stupid creatures on the board at any given time.
Yeah. And to me, that like inherently affects your game plan of like Grim Hireling. That type of stuff. So, and again, that's where I thought it was really interesting when they were on Druid's repository, because it's just when the creature attacks, you get the mana, you get the counter, so you can remove those counters and make mana. So again, we talked about that in a recent, like maybe a couple episodes back or whatever, about like they went away from Druid's repository and they like went more like into like the other stuff. And I'm not trying to say it's like the correct thing to do, but it's interesting when those cards started coming out and then Samut came in, the deck declined. I'm not saying it's a causation, but it's definitely association or correlation for sure.
One other thing before we get out of here was that you mentioned like you're probably swapping decks post Topdeck Expo. You want to run Corvold here, probably going to swap. What are you thinking right now you're swapping to?
Something that is, whether it's some form of Sands Green deck like Blue Farm. Probably Blue Farm over all of them. Brea is really interesting. I've been really interested in the Sands White like Storm decks because that's what they feel like a legitimate Storm deck. I'm not trying to say I'm going to play Yidris. Yidris is really cool. I'm pretty interested, but very interested in like these Thrasios, like Vial Smasher decks. Really interested in like Rograkh, Thrasios. And again, right now, I would if I had to pick one, it's probably Rogsai because I think Rogsai occupies that space of like it's always been basically the deck that I like to play in any format, no matter the color, but the style of the deck. It rewards really tight playing and critical like junctures in the game, and you have way more agency over it than playing any other Storm deck. And that's like something that is kind of rough. Like it would be super sweet if somehow like I would be even interested in like building like a Rog Thrasios Storm deck like we just talked about with Song of Creation,
baby. So
yeah,
cool.
I want to. It's a cool card, but it's it stinks because it's like you can't really search for it in those colors outside of Campbell.
Yeah, that's the rough part.
That's the rough part. And again, that might be where you stick with like a 4-color Beseech deck or something like that. And honestly, like it's not that I just want like because I've been playing Corval forever and I've played all these other decks and I've enjoyed like almost any deck I've put together except for like I really didn't like Kadama Timna. I thought that deck was absolute dumpster fire, and it wasn't like I don't know like Ken's like current list now. It was the Hulk piles. I just thought it had a lot of too many do nothing cards in it at the time. So but like most of the time, like even when I played Rocco, like man, I really enjoyed Rocco. I thought Rocco was sweet.
Yeah,
gives
you so many options.
So many options, and it has its shortcomings. But like, what deck doesn't really? Outside of like Blue Farm, maybe. But I don't know. Probably definitely something that's going to be proactive. Has a really simple A+B combo. It gives me some form of advantage in the command zone, whether it's mana or cards, maybe both. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe they'll actually just like print a decent green card and keep me playing Corval because I really don't want to give up on the deck because it always feels like it can present a win. It's just not having the ability to interact with like I'm not even asking for like a pact negation. I'm just talking about like man, give me like a pyroblast in green that like counters like something else. Just anything that like just that simple like a cheap piece of interaction, a protection piece, and maybe another pivot plan that's not dockside would be like really nice. That would be kind of like where I'd like to see green go.
I definitely feel like as the game stands right now, it's really hard to justify not playing both blue and red. It is the way that when you look at the deck list, if you're not doing dockside stuff, it feels like your deck takes like a big power hit. If you're not doing breach stuff, kind of the same, although you don't, maybe to a lesser extent, but still probably the best win con. And then blue is just again it has the most broken old cards. It's getting some of the more broken new cards. We just keep seeing it pretty much. Those are the colors that really matter. I would say even more than black. I like having red. Like if I had to pick between them, though, I mean black gets you good stuff too. But yeah, I mean that Grixis shell keeps being good, and maybe control winter's coming. Maybe it's Malcolm Kedis winter. It's I don't know, Craig Silas time. That's a cool deck I want to play. We'll see what happens. As always, we'll have a quarterly update to tell you what actually won the winter. If I think it's pretty likely. I'd put your money on Blue Farm because it's won all the other seasons, so it seems like a safe bet. But we'll see. And again, and also kind of in the same vein as these other decks, kind of a control deck if those ones count. Kind of doing the same thing and drawing more cards than probably all of them but Talion. Anyways, thank you so much for listening to this kind of, rambly episode of Learning cEDH. If you enjoyed it, let us know down below what you like, what you didn't like, what you want us to cover next time. This might be the last episode before Topdeck Expo, but we might sneak another one in between then. At the very least, you can expect us to have a video breaking down, what we enjoyed about the event. I expect it to be amazing and super awesome. We're going to break that down. We're going to talk about the decks that did well, our terrible punts that we made, or at least mine, and all the nonsense we got up to. Again, as always, thank you for listening to this podcast. We're coming up on 5,000 subscribers. If you're not subscribed, maybe think about doing it. If you like these episodes, more of them keep coming, and I've been trying a lot of new things, and I want to have an even bigger year next year and do lots of new stuff. So keep an eye out on that. All that being said, thank you so much for watching. Go play cEDH, get good, and go break the meta. Have a good one.